Welcome to a new series called Getting into the Weeds with dbDOS. This is the best practices on file management, and my name is Mike Rauslog. Let's get right into it. So the first thing I want to get across to everybody is that we really kind of have to look at the vernacular, or the words around DOS, dbDOS, and all of the things that encompass that. One thing is for sure that dbDOS has really added a new level of words and also configurations. The main reason for that is because we're trying to explain what has happened over the last 20 years with MS-DOS, and so new words and configurations have to become part of the vernacular. Let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean by this new setup of words and concepts and ideas. What is your home dBASE path? Now this could be as easy as c:\dbase\dbase.exe, or it could be located on any partition, network drive, or anything. The next idea is where are your programs located, which may be different than where your dBASE is located. And now this could be an executable, a COM, or a PRG. And also keep in mind it could be a BAT file that does additional configurations that we have no idea about. And remember, the PRGs need to have the dBASE runtime on the path somewhere. So that could be in another location as well. Then, where's the data located, or where are the dbFs? And again, this could be on any drive, any partition, any location. And we need to know that, of course. Some of the programs that have been built over the years are also hard-coded with the locations in the applications. So we need to know how to find those specific locations and how to set up the drive so that it mimics that, so that dbDOS can actually work with the dBASE programs as they were written, or some programs may need to be rewritten at some point. So let's take a step back and look at the file system, in particular DOS. And if you think back to the MS-DOS days, think back to 1985, 1990, 1995, all of the time with MS-DOS, you really had one directory usually. You had a drive C, you might have had a drive D or some other things, but for the most part it was pretty simple with drive C. And if you did a dir, you had a pretty simple directory structure. You had c:\, you had dbDBASE, you had WordPerfect, you had Lotus 1, 2, 3. It was pretty well set up. Over time, though, additional things started to get added to it. Additional directories, subdirectories, additional drives, different partitions. So things started to get a little bit more complicated. And as time continued, many permutations abound. Keep in mind that, there were configurations that were installed for you and set up everything, and then there was times when you had to install it yourself. And keep in mind that a lot of these configurations were created maybe 10 to 15 years ago or older, and now the people are trying to recreate those configurations may not remember or may not have been a part of creating those configurations in the first place. So then if you want to add another layer of complexity onto it, we have the compound the situation with network drives or map drives. So a typical setup may look like the following. You have mapped things to the K drive, and there could be data files on there on the K drive in the app data directory, and that's hard coded into the program, and the program is looking for k:\app data customer dbF. But dBASE itself is on a C drive, and dBASE programs can be found in the dBASE programs directory. And so trying to get everything to be set up and to be able to be found, and if you had stuff hard-coded in there, just makes it an additional challenge for us to be able to find where things are located. Now this will hopefully help you understand a little bit more about what we have to understand and what you as a user of dbDOS need to understand when creating configurations. And it really helps to have some of these best practices that we're going to lay out for you in this presentation. So let's take a step back and understand dbDOS and the drives that it sets up. The first thing is dbDOS is a single point, and that's what the drive represents. Think about the drive as a directory, a single point directory. So I could have multiple directories, and each one of those directories is going to be represented by a drive. dbDOS supports multiple drive mount points. That means that I could have multiple directories, multiple drives. Remember that the top level directory represents the drive of that directory. All subdirectories are included in the mounted drive. So if I would point to a directory with a subdirectory, that subdirectory is automatically on the path. But when I point to a directory, those files are the only files that get looked at in any of the files in the subdirectory. There is no outward understanding of anything outside of that directory and its subdirectories. So let's take an example here really quick. And if we had a C:\dbase, C:\dbase programs, and C:\dbase samples, you would see if we said mount C:\dbase, that in DOS speak, it would really be setting the path to C:\dbase, C:\dbase samples, and C:\programs. So all of the files located underneath base would all be known to the actual virtual machine. Another way is if I look at this again and I look at the example and I have that exact same thing and I would just mount C:\dbase samples, the only thing that the VM is going to understand is the files located in the samples directory. It's not going to know anything about dBASE, the parent directory, and it's not going to know anything about the other dBASE programs. All it knows about is the files located in the samples directory. If you looked at that from a path command, the only thing you'd have is C:\dbase samples. No other directories would be known or understood, and so C would represent just the samples directory, and that would be the top level directory inside of the VM. So continuing on with another example, same thing, exact same thing. Now let's say I mount C to dBASE programs and D to samples. Same idea. When I talk about DOS speak, C would only know about the files in the programs directory, and D would only know about the samples files in that directory. So when I set my path, to get them to be both known, I'd have to set path equals C:\, and D:\, and that way both of those directories would be represented in the path and it would understand those. Now again, the way to do that would be to go to the top level directory and say mount C space C:\dbase \, and then all the subdirectories and all the files would be located underneath of that, and it would be setting to C from that standpoint. So let's talk a little bit about the suggested best practices for dbDOS. Now when you think about it, this is the exact same directory structure that we've been using so far. We have the exact same setup, and what we may have in there is we might have a recommended directory layout. That's where we have dBASE. Notice on the left hand side that we had dBASE, programs, and data. What I might want to do is I might want to create a new directory called my dBASE and move everything underneath that one directory. So I have a top level directory as the mount point, and then all subdirectories underneath that mount point are known as that drive. So in other words, using that same example, if I had this, I could mount C:\my dBASE. Then dBASE, programs, and data would all be reflective of C drive. So everything would be known underneath there. I wouldn't have to set any more paths. I wouldn't have to set anything. Everything would be known to that directory from that mount point. This eliminates a ton of other issues. So dbDOS would recognize the following: C:\, dBASE, programs, and data, and it would all be located under one set of directories. That makes setting up dBASE much simpler, much easier. And to do this, all you have to do is just move all of your programs and data under one directory. This works great if you don't have to worry about hard coding, you don't have to worry about map drives, you don't have to worry about any of those other things that throw some monkey wrenches into the works. But for the simplest setups, this really makes sense of putting everything under one main directory and then pointing to that main directory as the C drive and then mounting and working with it from that standpoint. Now, If this doesn't work, you can try to consolidate your directories down as much as possible so that you can get as much in one drive as possible and then point to your other drives as needed. Keep in mind that when you do a top level directory, it thinks that that's going to be mounted to whatever drive you say. So if we say mount C, C:\my dBASE, then it's going to consider that to be C. If I said mount D space C:\my dBASE, then it would be considered D. So whatever mount point you give it is where it's going to be located from that standpoint. So let's talk a little bit more about best practices. If you cannot consolidate your directories, okay, that's number one. If I can't put everything into that best practices situation, then what do I have? Remember that your top level directory is the drive. So if I put it at my dBASE, that's going to represent the C drive or whatever mount drive you give it, and every directory and subdirectory underneath that will be on the path automatically. Remember, if you point to a subdirectory, dbDOS has no idea about the parent directories, and it doesn't know anything outside of the other subdirectories. So again, in that situation, if I point it to samples, it doesn't know about programs, it doesn't know about the top level directory. All it knows about are the files in the samples directory, and that's it. And it's going to assign it that mount point, whatever drive letter we give that mount point is what the drive letter is going to be. dbDOS allows for even the most advanced configurations through modification of the configuration files. What we try to do with dbDOS is give you a configuration program that for 99% of the people will work beautifully. And so far, we've actually been able to hit that number fairly closely. We've had a lot of people have interesting configurations where we've talked to them, we've actually helped them set it up, and it works great. Now, we have had to work with some people to get the exact structure correct, and some of that is just understanding what these 20-year-old configurations are all about. And finally, it really is important to understand that even the most advanced dbDOS configurations can even be done with a bat file. So you can do additional settings. You can make a command file or a bat file, a batch file that will set up additional directories, subdirectories, and all that kind of stuff. So we really do have the ability to get as complicated as needed, or as, in most cases, as lightweight as we need. A lot of people just need to go out and point to dBASE, bring it up, bring them their programs, run their programs. Everything is great. But there are those people that have been using programs for so many years, and they've been set up so long ago that they just don't have an understanding of how to reset it up. And that's where we have to help them out and try to help them with the advanced configuration settings and really try to help them understand what they need to do to be successful. So with that, I'm going to let you go. This was getting into the weeds with dbDOS, and this was around file management. Hopefully now you have a better understanding about the files, the mounting of drives, and the whole file management setup with inside of dbDOS. Thank you for listening, and have a great day. Bye-bye.